We were on top of a mountain on the grave of a Christian imperialist, overlooking this incredible scenery in the Garden of the Gods. It was the Mystic Hymnal Songwriters Retreat. And as we sat there overlooking this beautiful valley and having spent all this time together writing songs and thinking about how group singing and worship could be something more unitive and full of love rather than a lot of the dogma and fear that many of us had experienced, I asked everybody, is there anything about where we came from, anything about the religion that a lot of us left that we can leave here this weekend? Maybe we could leave it here in this grave site with this Christian imperialist. I don't want to forgive as bypass. I don't want to overlay one story with a different story so much as feel the story as life, feel the betrayals, the pain, the wounds as grace. And so we opened the circle, and then after every share, we'd sing this little refrain together. I forgive you, please forgive me too. And just sang it as life to life, as spirit to spirit. And it was really nice. We were going around and people were sharing things that they'd like to leave there. But I could feel that there was something held back, especially with a few of the people that shared. I could tell that there was more emotion under the surface than they were acknowledging or that they were able to express. And so I did something unusual. I felt moved to sort of collect the energy of the group and give it a voice that I was feeling. I was feeling this kind of pent-up energy. And so I threw myself onto the grave. I wasn't expecting to do this, by the way, just because it was kind of a spontaneous, strange thing that happened. But I threw my body down onto the grave and I screamed into it. Ah!
Yeah.
Ah!
Yeah. Come on.
This was obviously a bizarre thing to do. You could hear my voice clamoring off the walls there of the canyon. I screamed as loud as I could. I lost my voice for a while after that. But then after that, something happened. Something kind of came loose emotionally in the group. I laid there for a minute and said something to the effect of like, you didn't know. Can you feel the pain that was created in these bodies now? And then with tears flowing down my face, I kissed the grave. And that moment was kind of a pivotal moment for me. And I think for some other people on that mountaintop. It was a moment where we weren't bypassing any of the pain that had been caused. We weren't avoiding it. We weren't trying to get away from it. But we were making a decision that we weren't going to allow it to continue to run anything about our lives. And we were deciding that we were not going to let those voices have the say in the tradition that we came from anymore. And that brings me to the final song on the Magnificat album, Amazing Grace. Welcome to the Loving This podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Loving This podcast. It's been a while. My name is Michael Gungor. I'm so glad you've joined. Today's the last episode of the Magnificat series. And this is Amazing Grace. It's the last song on the album. And I've been putting off this episode for a while now. I think there are a few reasons for it, actually. But before we dive into that, let me just tell you some of the cities that I'm going to be on tour with here in May with Mystic Hymnal. These beautiful sing-along events that I think you'll really enjoy. So if you're anywhere near these cities, please come hang out. May 3rd, going to be in the Bay Area. May 5th, going to be in Newport Beach. May 7th, going to be in Phoenix. May 9th, going to be in Amarillo, Texas. We're going to be in Kentucky/Indiana, somewhere along the border there, at a conference May 14th through 17th. I'm going to be in Asheville May 22nd, Austin May 23rd, Houston May 24th. I'm going to be in Fort Collins, and then Denver, and then LA, and Monrovia, and Tucson. And more dates are actually shaping up as well. A couple other fill-in dates between there. So stay tuned. Follow the newsletter if you're not signed up to my email list. And you can also stay abreast of all of the developments and things that are coming out there. Okay, cool. So let's jump into the episode today. Let's talk about why this episode took so long to come out. First of all, this song is a beast musically. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to say about it. It's like by far the most dense harmonically on the album. Plus, I just opened both of the sessions and checked out the track count, and there's like 473 tracks between these two different sessions that I had to combine to try to make this thing work. Like, my computer's pretty good, but it was having a hard time keeping up with this song. So all of that, and honestly, I don't even know or remember what I was doing a lot of the time while I was making this. This song, more than any other song I've ever made, actually, was made in just tiny little steps. You know, these steps where I had no idea where I was going next. I just put on the next harmony and then, oh, wow, okay, I guess we're going into another key. And all of it was very fun and it was very open-handed and playful and spontaneous in all the decisions. But then going back is like, what happened? Where was I? So I wasn't quite sure how to handle all of the musicality of that for this podcast. But there's another reason that I think I've put off this episode so long. And that's because I think part of me didn't want it to end. I've really loved doing this series. And I've really loved being in this album, making it, talking about it. And I think there's something that feels like an end to this whole chapter of this album by putting out this final episode. Like, this was kind of like the last thing in the promotion plan. This is how I was talking about it. And so I'll be on to the next thing after this episode. And that's kind of sad. But I think the biggest reason of all that I've been procrastinating like crazy on finishing this final episode is because this song, Amazing Grace, and the reason for this song being on this album, it points to something that I feel like I've still been in the middle of, still processing, something that's still been shifting and becoming and not fully landed anywhere that I knew how to put the words to quite yet. You know, because I've done a lot of evolving over the years, and one thing I've learned is through a lot of those changes, I can talk about what I've learned, but it's usually after a minute. Like, sometimes it's hard to talk about it while it's happening. And for a while, what was happening with this song and why it's in the album felt a little too close to be able to talk about clearly yet. So here we are now, and something about this has now landed enough to talk about. So we're going to talk about the song. We're going to talk about why it's here. We're going to talk about my relationship with the language, with the tradition that gave me words like grace in the first place. And we're going to have a good time. So, last episode, Amazing Grace. Here we go. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound of love that sets us free. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see. If you've been with us thus far on the journey, you may remember that we started this whole journey with like these characters. You had the forest, you had the clown, you had the child. There's this whole movement of inviting that which felt exiled, that which felt separate, that which felt unsacred into the heart of love, into the divine. And as we'll talk about in this episode, that to me is not just the thrust of this album, but sort of the meaning of life, if you will, for me. It's everything. It's the gospel. And so including this old Christian hymn on it is meaningful for me in a lot of ways that I'm going to dive into here. But the first thing that you may notice, if you're aware of the song Amazing Grace at all, which you probably are, pretty famous, but you may notice that I've changed some of the words. And, not everybody has been super stoked about me changing the lyrics to what might be the most famous hymn on earth. I remember I posted my version of the lyrics when I first wrote them on Instagram. And boy, oh boy, there was, a significant amount of pushback. People were upset. How dare you change the lyrics to Amazing Grace? Who do you think you are? And I get it. I understand the reaction. Amazing Grace is not just a song. For a lot of people, it's a really sacred thing. It's like a really important part of their whole tradition. But here's the thing. This is my tradition too. I didn't wander in from the outside, start rearranging somebody else's furniture. I was born inside of this thing. I was a pastor's kid. I grew up in this. It formed me, the language, the songs, the rituals. Amazing Grace is important to me too. That's why it's on here. And in a strange way, it's because it's such an important song that I feel like those of us within the tradition don't just have a right to question this song, but actually a responsibility to. It's so important. To me, this song is way bigger than one artist's work. This is something that we as a tradition are saying. And what exactly are we saying? I think we need to be intentional about that and courageous in adjusting where we've made mistakes. There's this thing I think that happens, and maybe especially in America, this attachment to the past and to past documents even, as though their original form is the thing that makes them sacred. The Constitution, the Bible, the lyrics to Amazing Grace. I think for a lot of us, holding to the original forms of those things feels like faithfulness. But where does faithfulness devolve into idolatry? I think about how Jesus would get mad at the religious people, call them whitewashed tombs for just worshiping the past and the texts, the things that were dead. He was always about things that were alive. He was like, look at the birds. He said, I'm come to give you life and life abundantly. Yet somehow his message and tradition with so many people has become an echo of the very thing that he fought the hardest against, that dead religion. So what if the way to be the most faithful to this tradition is to keep innovating and reforming? So that's the spirit I came to this staple of the Christian tradition, Amazing Grace, with. Not out of disrespect, but actually out of love and respect. I think this song is beautiful, and it's meant so much to so many people. For those of you that know the story of Amazing Grace, how it was written, it can add even more to its richness. The song was written in 1772 by John Newton, who was a slave trader. And the story goes that he was on a ship and a huge storm came and he thought he was going to die. And it kind of made him confront and see how he was living. He was living this terrible life as a slave trader. And he felt this grace. He was literally saved in the storm and felt God sparing his life that he might live a better life. It's beautiful. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me, are the famous words. And in a bit, I'm going to spend some time talking about why I changed some of those words. But the basic essence of the song I really love and wanted to honor. I think stories of people turning from really destructive ways of living are important stories to tell. And this idea that there's nothing that's too big or ugly to be welcomed into love is at the core thesis of this whole album. And sometimes that love looks like continuing to grow and destroying some of the sacred cows that we've made along the way.
'Twas grace that met my...
So, as many of you probably recognize, this is the voice of Lisa Gungor. Her artist name is Isama. And I'm just really grateful that she was willing to do this on this album. As many of you know, her and I are not together anymore romantically, but we've done our best to maintain a spirit of love and respect for each other as co-parents and friends. And for her to be a part of this project means the world to me.
Jesus from
I want to start this next part with trigger warning, because I'm going to tell a story that involves sexual abuse. So if that's something you need to step away from for a moment, I'll give you a second. You can actually just scrub forward to about minute 19 if you'd like to skip this and take care of yourself. Okay, so I once heard a story about a man who regularly abused his daughter. He would come into her bedroom at night and abuse her. And while he did it, he would sing worship songs. And I remember just being horrified by that story. And it haunted me for a long time after I heard it. There's just something about that grotesque combination of what's supposed to be sacred and loving with that degree of horror. And I kept coming back to the idea also that for this woman, for the rest of her life, think about what the name of Jesus sounds like to her. Think about what Christian language sounds like. What does worship sound like to her? It probably sounds like that room, like the horror of those nights. For her, the word God probably doesn't land in her body as love, or the word grace probably doesn't feel like an invitation into life. It probably doesn't feel beautiful to her at all. But it probably feels like the system that is responsible for her trauma. And I know this is an extreme example, but religion being used for harm is not nearly as rare as one would hope. Even if it's usually in less extreme forms, still the shame, the fear, the sense of never being enough, that God who is always watching and always disappointed or judging. A lot of people carry wounds that were given to them in the name of Christ, in the name of Christianity. And this is part of the reason that for a long time, I stayed away from Christian language entirely. For a long time, I tried to polish my views and understandings of theology, or when I was speaking of God, maybe I was speaking of the infinite love within all being. But I knew that's not what a lot of other people hear when I say a word like God. So for a long time, I opted for other kinds of words when I was trying to speak about the biggest, lens of reality. I liked words like love and self and the universe, maybe spirit every now and then if I was feeling bold. But my assumption for a long time was that if I spoke much about Jesus or Jesus sounding language, that I'd also probably have to, offer this whole set of disclaimers and definitions. Felt like I'd need to explain that I don't hate gay people. I'm not against science. I don't think you're going to hell. And all of that seemed exhausting and unnecessary. So I just decided for the most part to stay away from these triggering Christian words. But there's been some things that have happened in my life over the last few years. Some shifts have happened as a result. And I have some different perspective about this. So one thing that's really impacted my view of this is the amount of aloneness that I've witnessed. I've noticed that many of us who were hurt by or just outgrew the religious containers that we grew up in, that we felt constrained by. We often have these beautiful freedom experiences in leaving those containers. But also there can be a lot of aloneness. It can get lonely wandering around by yourself outside the edges of the camp. And I don't just mean, personally lonely, like not having friends, but there's like a spiritual isolation that can happen. Sure, I can go out into nature. I can enjoy God in the forest by myself. And that can be really nice. The birds aren't going to shame me. The sunshine isn't going to tell me I'm going to hell if I don't get it right. But I found that a spirituality that gets disconnected from the rest of humanity can really easily devolve. It can hollow out into sort of this like self loop. It can devolve into this lonely, depressing spiritual narcissism. And if we really all are connected, then spirituality isn't ever a private affair. Your freedom and my freedom go together. They're connected. Being free from closeness to other people isn't true freedom in itself, even if it is nice to have a break sometimes. But how can we be together in meaningful ways when it comes to our spirituality? Because, most of our society is built around very pragmatic connections. We're together in places of business, or, we eat together, we play together, we come together to take care of our physical and emotional needs. But there's something about religion or spirituality that serves a really specific role. Pretty much anywhere you go in the world, you can find some sort of religious or sacred space. Temples, churches, synagogues, mosques, places where what ties all those spaces together? Why do they exist everywhere? I'd argue it's largely about shared meaning. Some of the questions like, who are we? Why are we here? What's all of this for? That existential question mark at the center of everything. I think we need spaces where we can just sort of like sit in that mystery together, where we can sort of like click back from all the busyness of daily life and remember that we're part of this wild, absurd thing that is life. And from there, we can create the meaning that we want to create together to build the world that we want to live together. This is like the ground floor of our existence, And to do that, to have the rituals and the spaces necessary to sit in that mystery together, we need certain kinds of words that aren't just the pragmatic utilitarian words where we like point to a tree and say tree and we all know what we're talking about. There are some words, some spaces that aren't meant to be nouns. They're meant to evoke mystery. They're in a way meant to pull apart language itself. What are we talking about when we talk about God? We're going kind of underneath language itself. And I think we humans, we need that kind of language. The kind of language that points to whatever is bigger than we feel ourselves to be. I think about 12 steps and how a major part, an important part of the 12-step program is recognizing a higher power than whatever it is you feel yourself to be. And what I found in the post-deconstruction world is that people usually, we either have to remain alone and out in the wilderness, and there you don't necessarily need much spiritual language. When you're dwelling in presence, you don't need language by yourself. Language is for us together. Language gives us enough shared meaning to create shared rituals that can help us remember together, connect together to the mystery that we are. And a lot of people who leave Christianity end up, if they want to be with other people, they end up having to try out other traditions, right? Maybe they check out Buddhism or Taoism or Hinduism or something. And, I've done a lot of that myself, and I can attest that so many of these other traditions are full of incredible wisdom and beauty, but also it's a lot to learn a whole new world of meaning. There are myths and languages and customs and practices, and it can take a long time to let that kind of thing seep in enough to have it be your common tongue with other people. Plus, the grass isn't always greener on the other side like we like to think it is. I remember figuring this out when I was learning about Buddhism for the first time, and Buddhist practice. I would hear about it from, these great teachers that kind of translated it into English and into the West. I was like, this is beautiful. Like, wow. Buddhists just like sit there in their own being and just sinking into love and quietness. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And then I remember when I went to my first Buddhist temple years ago, and this was, I think, in Thailand or something. And I went into this temple expecting that, like just these zened out, spiritual masters or something. What I found was a bunch of people selling knickknacks for their ancestors for the afterlife, like selling things that they could send to their ancestors. I was like, what is this? I didn't even think Buddhists believed in an afterlife, which, like if all you've ever heard, if you lived somewhere else and all you ever heard of Christianity was like Anthony DeMello, The Way to Love, or John Philip Newell or Richard Rohr or whatever, these like mystical streams of Christianity. And then you show up to the local First Baptist church in America, you're going to be like, what is this? So what do we do about this? Do we really have to search the world for the most perfect possible tradition and then learn all that? I don't think so. And honestly, I don't even think it exists. I think every tradition has beauty in it and it has ugliness in it. Any tool can be used for good or for harm. So what if rather than completely abandoning the traditions that get too small, we instead get courageous and innovate within them? We reform. We tear down the walls that need tearing down. We make it bigger. I think that's what the original framers and movers and mystics of all these traditions did. They always were reforming, arguing, creating. And more, I keep feeling this pullback towards the language of the tradition that I grew up in, Christianity. Not because I think it's perfect or that I believe the things that I used to believe, but I do know it well. I know its contours, I know its textures, and I've come to see what's incredibly unique and beautiful about it. And not only that, it's the water that we swim in the West. I mean, it's all over our culture. In God We Trust is on our money. It's in the Pledge of Allegiance. Christianity is everywhere in the culture, whether we like it or not. We need shared language to create shared meaning, to create a world together that we can inhabit and remember together who we are. And we're not going to come up with a new mythology, at least not anytime soon. It takes centuries for these things to develop. So we're either left with no language to be able to speak of the unspeakable things, or we're left with the language that's here and we get to determine what it means and how it's used and why it's used. That's up to us. So why not use it as a tool for good? Maybe we don't honor this inheritance by freezing it. Maybe that's not how inheritance works. Maybe you honor by using it in the most beautiful and alive ways that you can. And so that's why Amazing Grace is on this album, and it's on the album in this form. It's not just about the song Amazing Grace. It's not just a cover that I thought would be fun to have on an album. To end with this really is coming to terms with the entire tradition that I came from. The tradition that both taught me that I was exiled and separate from God, and the tradition that allowed me to see God in everything. The tradition that has waged countless so-called holy wars in so many ways against so many people, and the tradition that has taught me and taught us why those holy wars are not holy. It's just all here. It's all in this. It's messy. And this whole thing is part of the giant homecoming that is grace, because that to me feels like the mother's heart that we've been looking at through this whole album. This thing that says, bring everything that's here, whatever you can find, bring it to me, and let's transmute it. Let's turn it into divine love. even these aspects of your life that may have felt like the thing that exiled you in the first place.
Yea, though my flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease.
So if we're going to take the reins and make this tradition whatever we want it to be, whatever brings the most joy and love and peace into the world, I have a few things that I'm careful with the songs that I sing that use this kind of language. And those are reflected in some of the lyric changes that I made here. So here's a few of the lyric changes. The first big one is, of course, "A Wretch Like Me," which is one of the most famous lyrics of the song. And some people, would wonder why I changed that, especially since this was written by a slave trader. And something for a lot of people that's beautiful about that lyric is how big the grace can be, that even somebody that far gone could still receive grace. And I love that aspect of it, but I think there's something really important about making a clear distinction between the wretchedness of the things that we do and who we are, our identity. I think there's something about identifying as bad, as being a wretch, as being inherently fallen or corrupt, that actually reinforces the wretched behavior in the first place. If I am a wretch, then of course I'm going to behave in wretched ways. If you want children to behave better, you shouldn't tell them, "You kids are terrible." If you keep repeating to kids that they're terrible and they're lousy, rotten kids, and that's why they need to behave better, that's going to backfire in your face. A kid who has a higher view of themselves is going to behave better. Of course, there can be extremes of anything on either side. We can so identify as a good person that we actually ignore the ways that we're being harmful. So any ways that we really solidify our identity, I think, can be problematic. But "a wretch like me" just doesn't work for me anymore, especially in context of this album where it's the heart of the mother saying, "Everything, bring it all to me. It's all beautiful. It's all welcomed." "A wretch like me" just kind of flies in the face of that, I think. So I changed that one. I changed it to "How sweet the sound of love that sets us free." The next line I changed was in the next verse, "'Twas grace that met my heart in fear." Normally it says, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear." I just don't like that. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's helpful. I think our hearts are love. God is love, and at the core of all of this is love. So saying that God would teach my heart to fear, that frankly sounds demonic to me. And it's something that I would hear a slave trader say that hasn't fully been redeemed yet. And yes, from that place of absolute feelings of separateness and exile, fear might actually be an initial impulse for change. I think of that verse, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom," but it's not the fullness of wisdom. It might be enough to like, "Oh no, this way of life is not working anymore. I better do something else." That initial impulse may be a grace and a good first step, but it's certainly not the end of the road. It's certainly not the fullness of wisdom or love. And then the next line I changed is, "How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed," is the original lyric. And I changed that to, "How precious does this faith appear that frees us from belief." And that's probably maybe one of the more spicy lines of the whole thing. But what I'm pushing back against here by changing this lyric is the very common framing of belief particularly in like evangelical circles, about when we believe and then that's like somehow kind of a magic thing that allows God to do something, forgive us or heal us or whatever. And I think that just makes us the center of the story rather than God. There's a sort of self-importance or self-righteousness about that to me. And then I really like faith better. Faith to me is this letting go. It's this surrender. It's this embrace of death, the death of who I thought I was, into this moment, into the fullness of the divine, where belief is some kind of idea, some kind of abstraction that I hold on to and form an identity around. And so the faith frees me from my belief. It's not that my belief does something so God can now act. And then the last change is a minor one, but kind of an important one to me. When we've been there 10,000 years, as though we're looking forward to some other time, and that's where love is really going to be. That's where God is really going to be. Someday after death, probably, in heaven. And that whole escapist way of looking at all of this, to me, is the root of so much suffering, so much distance and exile from God, as opposed to noticing that heaven is here and now, that the divine is fully here already. And so I changed when we've been there to we've been here. To sing must pray than when we first begun. So what is grace anyway? If we don't see God as being some guy in the sky, then grace can't be some sort of, magic dust sprinkled upon God's favorites. Grace isn't some, secret password that only a few select people are given to get into heaven, to get into the party. Grace, I think, is the pull towards union. Here's what I mean by that. You can almost imagine like a black hole. Have you ever seen a picture of a black hole and how even light bends into it? When you get close enough to the black hole, it pulls everything into it. It's like gravity itself is like, it's this pull, right? It's sort of hard to describe what that feels like until you've experienced it. When you've experienced something in life that became grace for you, you know that event or that experience was absolutely necessary. My friend Hope, who you heard from on the first podcast of this series, talks about the pivot note a lot, which I really love, this metaphor of like one note pivoting from one place musically to another. There's a lot of that in this piece of music, Amazing Grace, actually. Let me show you one of them. So this part of the song is going to be in the key of G, and the notes that I wanted you to pay attention to is this note, A. So in this key, it's the 2 of the scale. Do, re. So as we switch keys, we're moving from this key, G, to this key, D. Then that same note that was the 2 in the last key becomes the 5 in this key, which becomes really like, 'twas grace, gives us a new key. So when you look from the new key that you're in and you think of that note, it was necessary for that note to be there. That note got you here. But from the last place we were in the last key, that note was actually part of kind of a dissonant chord. It was in that chord, it's not just the most straight ahead note. And if you're lost, let's be in the metaphor here with me. If you're lost in this dissonance in your life and whatever it seems like it's creating this dissonance, if you're just locked there and you're just stuck in this chord and that's your life, you may feel like it's unbearable. But when you see that note and how it was absolutely necessary to get you to the next one, I think that's kind of a good metaphor for grace. Here's another one, an even better one. The story of the prodigal son. In Yeshua's parable about the prodigal son, there's a son who demands his inheritance from his father early and leaves and squanders it. Eventually kind of comes to the end of his money, becomes desperate and turns back. And in this story, you don't find the father either in complacency or in desperation. He's not out there following the son around as the son wastes the money, begging the son every day to come back home. He's staying put. He's staying grounded at home and in consent, allowing the son to do whatever he wants. But he also cares. It's not that he just doesn't care, because at the first sign of the son turning back towards home, the story says that the father runs to meet him while he was still far away. It wasn't just, okay, fine, you can come back. There was a desire. There was a call, a pull, a bend back towards home. The father wanted the son home. And that's grace. There's like, it doesn't override consent. But when you give your consent, life pulls you into itself. Love pulls you into itself. If you seek, you shall find. If you knock, the door will be opened. The universe is not static. It's not symmetrical. It has a bend towards yes, towards life, towards being, towards love. There's a gravity, and that gravity is grace. And when you consent to it, when you allow life to be what it is fully in this moment, it has this way of running to meet you. And when you start getting an eye for that, when you start noticing the grace that's available at any moment in any circumstance, then all of life becomes grace. And from there, you could never say, a wretch like me. You were never a wretch. You were always loved, always beautiful, and welcomed home. And that to me is the thrust of this whole album. It's the thrust of all my work, and it's the story of life itself. It's the gospel. And so as we come to the end of the album here with this last section of the song, this Amen section, we're just finding it all coming back home. And here at home, we've no less days to sing God's praise, or I say Ma's praise here because of mother being the primary metaphor through the album. But we have no less days to sing Ma's praise than when we'd first begun. And so we actually hear the beginning motif of the album again, but this time a little more developed. To remind you of that first theme, let me just play you the beginning of the album one more time. Listen to the melody of the whistle there. And then here's where we go at the end of Amazing Grace, the end of the album.
Then when we first began.
And here comes that melody again. Okay, so I'm going to play you the whole song here in a minute, but first I want to just talk about for a second what's next. I have been feeling this consistent pull to shape my language more in the mystical Christian tradition again. And that's surprising to me after a lot of years of avoiding some of the language, but The truth is, this has always been my home base. I went to this event recently where this woman called out the name Yeshua HaMashiach, which apparently means Jesus, the Anointed One. I didn't even know what it meant, but when I heard it, I literally kind of went into a trance, actually. And I've been having all of this sort of strange, mystical, and very clear guidance, if you will, into participating in this stream that goes back all the way to Christ, but it's never been the mainstream Christian stream. There's always been this undercurrent, these, the desert mothers and fathers, the mystics, the Jesuits, the Celts. There's all these sort of kind of underground carriers of this mystical Christian tradition that is so beautiful. And it's not so based in belief and identity, but in this union with the divine that we find in Christ. And so I'm just going with it right now. I'm just following the flow. And the next podcast that I'm going to release is going to come with the release of a new song that uses that phrase that sent me into the trance, Yeshua HaMashiach. If I could point you towards one thing, though, is please sign up for my email list. That's how I'll let you know about all this stuff. The music coming up. I've got a book that's going to be coming out eventually here. I do these weekly meditations right now on my Patreon page. But all the stuff that I'm doing, if you're signed up to the mailing list, that's the best way to see what's going on. So please make sure that you're signed up for that at either michaelgungor.com or gungormusic.com. And with that, we'll also let you know about the tour dates that are coming up here in May. Excited. We're going to be down through California and through Arizona, and we're going to be in Texas in several places, playing a concert in Asheville. So check out the tour dates coming up there as well. And just thank you. Thank you for being part of this whole thing. This Magnificat chapter was such a fun chapter for me creatively, and excited to go with you to what's next. Here's the entire song, Amazing Grace, and we'll talk to you soon.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound of love that sets us free. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see.
Was grace that met my heart in fear, and grace my fears relieved.
Oh, how precious did
This faith appear that frees us from belief.
Yea, though my flesh and heart to sing must pray. Then when we first begun.